Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
when I was younger and just got into online college, I got my first apartment. I had 3 jobs and one was third shift, but I was more than ready for independence. While I had a great time there, I did have one problem: my new downstairs neighbor. So the other tenants are a bit older than I am, with one of them being an old man who lived there for 20 years. The other was an older woman with a small kid, probably been here for 3 or 4 years, and an empty apartment downstairs. I keep to myself, so I never really spoke to any of them before until I noticed that there was a new move-in. A man that seemed close to my age, maybe a little older, black greasy hair, and a little overweight, but in my experience living here people seem nice and I was happy to possibly have someone to say hello to. That possibility turned sour really quick when a casual hello turned into that trash stinks remarks from him when I was taking out the trash, and snide remarks under his breath when I've done nothing, even remarking on my sister's lack of a bra when she came to visit me. Naturally I was grossed out and annoyed that he had to comment on anyone, especially my sister, and told the landlord. Nothing came of it, of course. One day I was asleep and someone came banging on my door. I had no idea who it was and my anxiety was beyond strong. I'm alone and never expect a knock that wasn't planned. It was the neighbor saying that I was being too loud and I need to stop harassing him. I explained through a closed door that I was asleep and that I was not making noise. He left and stomped down the stairs while muttering and calling me a rat for some reason. My heart felt like it was beating out of my chest. I went back to bed, only to hear him coming back up the stairs and bang on my door. When I addressed him again, he said that I was harassing him and that he's calling the cops because I'm still making noise. I told him to ask the other neighbor because there's no way that I could possibly be making noise when he is on the other side of the building. He thanks me politely before stomping off and continuing to call me a rat yet again. I tell the landlord right away that one of his tenants is acting hostile and I don't feel comfortable nor safe, and he tells me he will look into it. I hear nothing for a week. It turned out it was the old neighbor hitting the floor with a stick like one of those classic cartoons because the rude neighbor was playing music too loud. I swear he should have known that, as I'm on the other side. It was like he wanted an excuse to come speak to me. The following months it got worse. One day I walked out in a snowsuit so that I can play in the snow. He had to remark on my clothing being unnecessary, even when there's 3 feet of snow out. I forgot what I said in response, something like it's not his business, but he basically just said screw you. I just walked off to go play in the snow. It gave me little enjoyment because of the earlier interaction, so I went back home to get ready for work. The snowstorm got worse and I had just came back from my night shift. I see him alone in the parking lot with the car on and the windows up. I was on high alert as I carefully walked around and up the alley to my apartment. The second I closed the door to go upstairs, I hear loud, wall-shaking music. It's him. He's blasting his car music at max volume in a snowstorm at 3 in the morning. I was surprised and confused because what was his reasoning? He did it until 8 in the morning, and I found out later it was despite the old neighbor for telling him his music is too loud. Soon it all started getting serious, cursing in the hallway and playing music louder, with the police knocking at our doors asking us about a noise disturbance, and now a mutual hatred amongst the neighbors at the jerk who kept us all up. But that's not the worst part. I just got back from my night shift and it's 3 in the morning yet again. I'm dragging my tired feet over to the mailboxes that are right inside the townhouse door. As I'm looking through the advertisements and letters, his door opens at the top of the stairs. My stomach tightens, hoping I don't have to interact with him, but drops when he starts speaking unintelligibly. At the top of the stairs he's gurgling and mumbling something. What? I said, but he repeats the same weird sounds again, only more aggressive. I felt something was more than off and got right around and out the door heading back to my car. I thought I'd rather sleep in my car than possibly be attacked in the hallway, and as I'm having the thought, I hear the window above slam open. I freeze and then spin back around the edge of the corner. It's him, and he's looking for me out the window. I stand there for a moment listening to him, and he's speaking gibberish and yelling. I thought to myself that it was my chance to sneak upstairs, past his door, and into my apartment. I sped up the stairs and past his door to the second flight of stairs. Right as I reach the top of second flight of stairs, his door swings open with a big slam that makes me jump, and I hear him muttering and gibberishly speaking loudly while walking up the stairs. My heart is beating out of my ribcage as I am simultaneously walking and fishing my keys out of my bag. I kept fumbling the keys looking for the correct one in the dark hallway as I hear him walking up the last couple steps. I mentally told myself not to panic as I spot the correct key and slide it into the keyhole on the first go. I swing the door open and practically launch myself inside before slamming it shut behind me. I pause and hold my breath as I hear him just 5 5 feet from my door, muttering gibberish and calling me a rat before walking back downstairs and out the building. I watched him through a crack in my window blind, pacing back and forth, muttering, cursing, and at one point screaming before walking off into the night. With a little bit of relief, I head to bed hoping he doesn't come back. The next day, I get a text from the landlord. He says that guy was arrested and won't be coming back. Seems he was off his medication again and attaches a link in the text. Of course, I raised an eyebrow to that comment thinking, now you tell me. The following link showed a mugshot and a description of his nightly activity to include stealing from a Turkey Hill, threatening cops that he'll shoot them, punching one of them, and previous to all this it said, earlier in the night when he dropped his pants and rubbed himself against a window then ran around the town square while yelling. Never did see him again, just his family coming in and moving his stuff. So about 12 years ago, I was 9 years old, and I was home alone with my 12-year-old brother. We were supposed to go to my aunt's house to have lunch and wait for my mother there. We got up at 10:30 in the morning. I took a shower, then my brother. After that, we were both in the bathroom brushing our teeth and finishing up when we heard someone knocking on our door. Since every time someone knocked at our door they turned out to be salesmen, we kind of waited for them to go away. After a couple of minutes, I went to see if they were still outside through the window, and no one was there. We continued getting ready when we saw a shadow go by through the bathroom window, which was kind of like a small square made with that kind of glass that makes everything behind it really blurry. We waited and saw in case it was just a bird flying by when a hand hit it, clear as day. We got scared. We didn't know what to do. My brother had his cell phone, so he immediately called the police. While it was raining, we heard a loud bang at the door. Someone was brute forcing it. I don't know if they were kicking it or ramming it, but it was one of the most frightening things I've ever heard. My brother told me to lock the bathroom door, so I did. It took 5 bangs so the perpetrator could finally bash open the door. Then the police answered. I remember the exact thing my brother said. He was whispering. His voice could barely be heard. Hello, there is someone in our house. I think they are stealing. Then a pause. We are at our address. Another pause. I'm with my little brother locked in our bathroom. Please hurry. While all that, I was sitting against the wall, hugging my knees. It was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences ever. I could hear the man going through all of our stuff, emptying stands, going up and down the stairs, opening cabinets. He even broke a few cups and plates. Then I heard the sound my cell phone does when it turns off, and I remembered leaving it on the kitchen table. I felt so stupid for leaving it there. Things continued for a couple of minutes when we heard him trying to open the door to the bathroom. My brother got a hold of a big metal rod we had lying around there. He started kicking the door. Who was there? The man screamed. We said nothing. Another kick, then another. I felt I was about to have an anxiety attack. My chest started to ache. I had chills and was really hot. I tried to remain calm, but it was just too much. After that he stopped. We heard the door opening and then silence. We waited for almost 10 minutes before going out of the bathroom. The living room was a total mess, lots of papers and books on the floor. Thought cabinets were open, cups and plates on the floor. In our mother's bedroom, the nightstand and the closet were open and everything inside them was all over the place. Upstairs, in our room, it was the same thing. In about 5 minutes, the man was able to go through everything we had and left a total mess. After that, my brother called my mom and she ordered us to go to my aunt's as soon as possible, so we did. When we got there, I was a little more relaxed. My aunt was waiting us with ice cream, probably because my mom told her everything and she wanted to calm us down a bit. We went back home at about 7. My mom told her boss she had a home emergency, so she left early. She cleaned up the house and left everything the way it was before so we could be relaxed. I really appreciate her effort and my aunts to calm us down and do everything so we didn't have to think about it. According to my mom, the police got home after she arrived. She explained everything, but because of lack of evidence, nothing could be done. The man was never caught and honestly I don't think they even tried to search for him. The next days my mom was home with us. Now I tell the story as a funny anecdote. Luckily no one was hurt and he only took useless stuff. But at the time, I was really scared. To a 9-year-old, an experience like that can have serious repercussions. I'm lucky it never came to that, and I got over that after a couple of weeks. There's an abandoned house between my town and the town next to me on one of the country roads that connects us. I've been to it before and even went inside twice with my sister and my best friend. It's an old house that dates back centuries, according to the bank records that I was able to find, and you can just tell by the design. The house is 2 stories with a basement, has lots of furniture and objects strewn about inside, and is far from empty. You can tell that it hasn't been lived in for decades, and whoever had previously owned it, it almost seemed like they just disappeared one day, leaving everything behind. The way way I was able to get in before was through the cellar door in the basement, which is broken open and propped up with some big sticks. My first visits were around 2 years ago, and I hadn't gone back at all into that time. Another friend had expressed interest in seeing the house when I told him about my experience, and so last summer I told him that I'd take him to it. I never thought it was a dangerous trip and told him that it's just an interesting place to explore. They parked across the street from the house in the parking lot of one of the industrial buildings nearby. The road was a rural road, but it was far from unused, and we didn't want to be questioned by anyone. My friend, being braver than me despite my previous visits, led the way across the street and to the front of the house. He asked me a couple questions about it and what stuff I found in there. I told him that the kitchen still had expired food in it and that the upstairs had a board game set that I ended up bringing home with me. As we walked from the front of the house to the side leading to the back with the cellar, I made note that there was a lot more brush than when I had went last time. I had gone in the spring when I had gone with my sister and best friend, and I never experienced the thick brush that I was now carefully moving through. I made a comment to my friend that there was a lot more foliage than when I had gone before, as we both tried to figure out a path to the cellar. Eventually, we pushed through some branches and found the cellar broken and propped open just as I had last seen it. We talked for a second about being nervous, and I really took in the view of the cellar that led into this dark, abandoned house. I remember being really intimidated while looking at the opening, and I made note that some of the sticks propping open the cellar didn't look familiar to me. I didn't state it out loud, however, as I thought it was just my anxiety. My friend and I discussed who should go first, and he said since I'm the expert, I should head in first. I was hesitant, but eventually, after a good 5 minutes of breathing and calming myself down, I started down the few steps of the cellar. It was an awkward entrance, as half the cellar was collapsed and left little room for maneuvering. You had to duck under the part of the cellar door that was still put together, then inch your feet down the steps, and finally turn your body sideways to fit through the small gap into the basement. I took a long time after ducking under the door, since my nerves came back for a second. I made it in fine, and my friend followed very quickly, which I appreciated. We both stood in the corner of the basement now, taking it in. I turned my phone's flashlight on, and he did too. There was a spider web in the path to the stairs up to the first floor. I looked around and found some sort of tool to knock the spider web down, and I took the tool and swiped it through the web. After that, I tossed the tool onto the concrete floor. My friend and I talked quietly, I don't remember what about, but afterwards, we fell silent for a second. Above us, I clearly heard footsteps on the boards above our heads. It almost seemed like they were heading to the stairs that led down to the basement. I remember this part the best, as I looked at my friend, and he didn't seem to react to the footsteps I was hearing. I looked at him, suddenly very worried, and before I could even say anything, he said we need to go. He turned around and practically jumped up the stairs. I remember thinking he got out insanely fast. I could see him turn and reach his hand back to help me up. I was a bit slower, but I also quickly stepped up the stairs and he pulled me through the opening. I landed on my hands and knees after I escaped the cellar, and I immediately stood up facing the weeds. I turned around to my friend, who was crouched, staring down the cellar. I said to him that we should get out of here, and he turned away and told me to go first through the weeds. I pretty much just ran through the brush, definitely getting cut up by something, but we made it through them and back in front of the house very quickly. My friend kept urging me to go in front of him, and he watched behind us before switching to flashing his light in the windows on the first floor of the front of the house. I asked him what he was doing and if he was okay. He didn't really answer me at first, so I asked him if he heard the footsteps before we bolted out of the basement. He turned to me and said that he heard them, and that's why he was watching the cellar to see if anyone was following us out. He continued, saying that after he pulled me up, he turned to guide me away before he let go of my hand, and when he turned back, he saw the bare feet of someone standing at the bottom of the cellar. Because of the cellar's dilapidated structure, he could only see their feet and a part of their legs. At that point, that's when he told me to go through the weeds first. He never saw them come up the cellar stairs or move away from them before he followed me. I didn't believe him at first and thought he was just trying to scare me, but I could tell by the serious tone of his voice and the silent look he gave me after telling me that he wasn't trying to make me laugh or lighten the mood. I still asked if he was lying, and he aggressively said that he wasn't. He told me that I heard the footsteps already, so I knew something had to be in that house. We stood for a second, not really saying anything, before we both then agreed to go back across the street towards our cars. We stood by our cars for a while, watching the house to see if anything or anyone would come out, but nothing appeared. After talking for a bit about how crazy that was, and him reassuring me that he was telling the truth, it started to rain and we decided to call it a night. I fully believe him, and he's always stood by what he saw. I haven't gone back to that house since, and I like to tell myself that whoever was in that house was just a homeless person finding shelter. I still get shivers to this day, however, thinking about how close that person was to me as I scrambled up the cellar. Now this is something I really want to talk about to be sure that everyone is cautious and stays level-headed at all times. Now for context, I lived in the middle of nowhere in Canada. It was an old town that had quite a few abandoned buildings due to absence of residents. Lee and many friends were tired of the lack of entertainment options for us, so what we did was explore these abandoned buildings. Prior to the experience I am about to talk about, we never had anything too crazy happen to us. Occasionally we'd see a small bit of blood like liquid, and we did see a pentagram on the ground from someone who went to a house previously, but nothing too bad, until the last time I had gone exploring abandoned buildings. Now when I was younger I used to go to a daycare that was part mental hospital. Weird combination I know. It closed down due to a lack of patients and lack of children at the daycare. I decided to go back there with my friends a few years ago. For context, I was 15 when this happened. Most of my friends were the same age. When we did get there it was rather cliche. There was fog, it was rather dark, and there was a light drizzle of rain. We went to the main gate which was padlocked shut. We decided to help each other hop over it and made a ton of noise. We were laughing and giggling the whole time, unsuspecting of what was to come. We looked around the small play place with flashlights we had on our person. Even with our somewhat powerful flashlights, our visibility was rather limited. We decided to enter the decaying building. Glass and dirt crunched under our feet as we stepped into the daycare section of the complex. There were still old toys, with chips from previous furniture, old torn dolls, and toys strewn about. The further we walked around the daycare section, we naturally became more and more silent, until all we could hear was the crunch of the dirt under our feet. I found some crayons in a plastic container in the corner of the room. I walked over to pick them up, when all of a sudden we heard a loud crash coming from behind a metal door leading to the psychiatric ward part of the building. My friends and I all looked at each other. As a whole, we were a group of 5, most of them were very bold. We all looked at each other when my friend Brian suggested we go and look to see where the sound came from. Personally, I was not too fond of the idea, but with my group of friends there was no way anyone was going to decline such a thing. We all stacked up on the door and opened it. It was rusted to the floor and we heaved to get it open. As we walked in, the metallic smells and musk became stronger, with a hint of something else which I couldn't put my finger on at that moment. We walked in, our flashlights pointed in every direction with Brian leading the group. The hallways were tight, and to the left and right were the occasional metal doorway, some with doors open. I felt slightly claustrophobic and it felt a little hard to breathe. As we continued, Brian shone his flashlight into a room and recoiled. We all stopped walking as Brian slowly entered the room. "What is it?" I asked him. I thought I saw someone here. It seems all fine now. To be honest, I thought he was just messing with us to increase our anxiety, but looking back I think he was completely honest. He backed out of the room and we continued walking deeper into the psychiatric ward, when another friend swiftly told us to stop. We came to a halt and all listened. In the distance ahead of us we heard the subtle pitter-patter of footsteps echo through the hallway. We all looked at each other, fear in each of our eyes. Brian continued walking toward the sounds. We considered turning back for a second without Brian, wondering if some ghost or something was in the building, but we couldn't do that to them. The closer we got the more I felt like I was being watched. When finally we entered a room on the right which had the smell of rotting meat. In front of us was a dead deer. Its insides were spilled all over the floor, staining the concrete. A friend of mine had a very weak stomach and vomited all over the floor. That's when we heard whispering from somewhere. Brian shone his flashlight to the corner of the room where a man with short hair was standing with his head down. He wore a bright green shirt stained with what I assumed was blood and torn tan pants. He did not have any socks and his feet seemed damaged. He was twitching and continued to mumble even after we saw him. We stared at him for a solid 30 seconds before he made his first true movement. He looked up at us with a haunting grin that sent shivers down our spine. "You guys here for the feast?" He said each word with varying inflection and energy. This kicked us over the edge and we bolted out of that room all the way back to the daycare center. The door was still open and we decided to try and slam it shut, but the rust and pure weight of the door almost kept it open. It took 3 of us pulling with all of our strength to close it, and just before we did I could still see the silhouette of the man watching us, his white teeth being the only other human feature I could see. As we sat behind the metal door catching our breath for a second, all looking at each for confirmation that we all saw the same thing. After a little bit of labored breathing from each of us, we heard a light tapping on the door. That's when we decided that it was time to leave. We booked it out of the vicinity completely and ran home. A year after we visited that spot, police went back to do a routine search of the area and found the man. It was stated that this guy used to go to the psychiatric ward before it closed down. He escaped the facility he was transferred to and lived off of the wildlife around the complex. When the cops brought him in, he had a series of diseases and sickness from eating raw meat. His mental condition was much worse than before. There were future rumors that he did kill someone in the forest while searching for food, but nothing has been confirmed. When I was 10, my parents and I went to visit my grandmother for spring break. My cousin also came to visit and we decided we wanted to go to the gym for the day. My grandmother dropped us off and said she would come and pick us up in 4 hours. On that day the gym was empty, there were a couple of adults in the exercise room, but that's it. We went to the basketball court and after 2 hours of playing tag and shooting baskets, we were bored. I've never been the biggest fan of swimming, but this gym had a pretty cool pool, so we changed into our bathing suits and headed in there. The pool was empty except for the lifeguard. We played a bunch of games and swam laps, but after about an hour, there wasn't much left to do and there was no one except us to hang out with to keep things interesting. So we decided to play a game of seeing how long we could hold our breath underwater. We stood in the shallow end near the clock on the wall so we could time ourselves. Instead of fully submerging, we just stuck our heads face down in the water. We did this a couple of times and I was winning. On our last round, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I figured it was my cousin giving up and telling me that I won, but instead, it was the lifeguard who told me to knock it off or she was going to have to ask us to leave the pool. Since we were tired of being in the pool, we figured we would get out, get dressed, and go back to the basketball court until my grandmother picked us up. We only had an hour left anyways and the water was freezing. As we got out, the lifeguard stopped us and asked if we wanted to go into the sauna to warm up and dry off. The sign said 18 years or older, so of course, we were super excited that she allowed us to do that. She walked us to the sauna and unlocked the door. The door was glass and the interior was made entirely out of wood. Inside, above the door, there was a clock, probably to help make sure you were not in there for an unsafe amount of time. The lifeguard stand was adjacent to the sauna, but if you looked out the door you could clearly see it. She followed us in and went over to the thermometer encased in plastic and unlocked it so she could crank up the heat. I figured that she must have to turn it on each time, so I didn't think anything of it. Both my cousin and I were very short girls and so we couldn't see the temperature that was printed on the thermometer knob, but I know she was turning up the heat. Then she left and shut the door behind her. I felt I saw her lock the door too, but I thought to myself, why would she lock the door when we might want to get out? I checked the clock and decided we should get out in 10 or 15 minutes. It was already plenty warm in the sauna, but now the room was blazing. It felt nice because I was so cold from the pool. After about 15 minutes, it was starting to get a little bit too hot and my cousin agreed that we should leave so we can get dressed. I went to turn the knob on the door, but it wasn't budging. I thought maybe it was jammed, so I shook it, but it still wasn't opening, and then I let my cousin try. She couldn't get it open either. We figured the lifeguard would be back in a couple of minutes, so we sat back down and waited. The room was getting hotter now too, and I really wanted to leave. I got up and started banging on the door and shaking, twisting the knob trying to get the lifeguard's attention. My cousin got up and joined me. We started screaming at the top of our lungs for her to let us out, but she just stared straight ahead. I don't think there's any way that she couldn't have noticed or heard two little girls banging and kicking the door and screaming. Now we had been in there for about 25 minutes. It was so hot in the sauna that it hurt to breathe. It felt like my lungs were on fire. My eyes and skin were burning. We sat back down and put our towels over our heads because they were still a little damp and it made it easier to breathe. I was so worried about my cousin as she is a couple of years younger than me. I looked at the clock and saw that we had been there for 35 minutes. I got up and walked to the door again and saw the lifeguard still just staring straight ahead. Again, I tried to get her attention by screaming that we needed out and banging on the door as hard as I could, but still nothing. I was starting to get pretty dizzy, so I went to go sit back down, but the wooden seats at the sauna burned my skin. My towel was completely dry, so I put it underneath me to sit on. My hair was also dry, but I wrapped it across my face to cover my nose, and I squinted my eyes so that they didn't burn as bad, but I could still watch if anyone walked past the door. It helped a little bit. My cousin was laying face down with the towel over her head, not moving or saying anything, so I nudged her to make sure that she was still okay. She was, but I could tell that we really needed to get out of there soon because she seemed a bit disoriented. It had been 45 minutes now and I was extremely nauseous. There was no way that the lifeguard would forget that we were in there, and I thought she would have to come back soon, but there was this little voice in my head telling me that maybe she purposely locked us in there. Finally, a man walked past the door towards the pool, but for some reason, I just couldn't get up. My whole body was on fire and I felt so dizzy. Luckily, this man wasn't going to the pool. He wanted to be let into the sauna and came back with a lifeguard. I saw them walking this way and immediately jumped up to grab my cousin. I knew now that for sure she had locked us in there because she pulled out her keys to unlock the door and let the man in. I didn't want to take any chances of us being trapped in there any longer, so as the man was trying to walk in, I was trying to shove our way out. As we were going out, the lifeguard started trying to shut the door and push us back with it. The man was clearly confused about what was going on and said, "I think they want out." The lifeguard let out a sigh and opened the door fully, and we ran away as fast as we could into the changing room. We only had about 10 minutes before a grandmother was supposed to pick us up. We were both so shaken by what just happened happened that we didn't say anything to each other as we got dressed or on the car ride home. When we got back to the house, my parents were making us dinner and I told them the story of what just happened. They thought that I must have been exaggerating and they didn't believe me. I truly think that that woman was going to let us cook alive in there. The only bit of doubt that I have is what would have happened if we actually died. She obviously would have gotten the blame. What was her end game? I'm 21 now, but I think about this interaction all the time, and when I'm in small spaces or I get too warm, I still have panic attacks. No one believes this story, and I get it. It's pretty absurd. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask for opinions, but do you think that this could have been some crazy misunderstanding, or do you think that she really just left us in there to die? I apologize if there are some errors or things that may not make sense. This is the perspective my story told from me and a part by a friend. This happened to be the weekend of Halloween and I personally don't like talking about it, but I've been told by my friend to share it to get it off of my chest. We and a friend were invited to a house party just for college students in the richer area of the town, so the house was huge with an acre of land and pool area. This party was themed to be a little naughty, so my friend dressed in a sexy nurse outfit and I dressed as a belly dancer. Majority of the party took place in the house as there was maybe like 70 people, with the house being very spacious, so not too difficult to get around. I'm not much of a drinker, but I did have some juice that was available. Some friends pulled me and my friend over to take some pictures and I set my drink down. After what felt like an hour of just taking pictures, I found my cup and took another sip, not even worrying that I left my cup alone for a while. Then a man came up to me who looked to be in his late 20s, early 30s. He said my boyfriend's name and said he's been trying to call me. That's when I realized I didn't have my phone on me. I have loads of respect for my boyfriend. We always make sure to stay in contact with each other, and since he had to work, I promised I would contact him, but I had just forgotten. The man said it's urgent and said I can use his phone to call at one of the rooms. So not thinking at all, I followed the man. If my boyfriend really wanted to call me, then I knew it would be something terrible. As we entered the room, I felt as if I just ran a mile and felt winded. The man closed the door behind me and sat me on the bed and gave me his phone. I started to feel more weak, like I just got a migraine and just couldn't call. Then I was helped to lay down and within seconds, I was out cold. I woke up later, not sure where I was or what even happened. I found my friend rubbing a napkin on my tummy while yelling. It took me a bit to come back to reality and I realized I was in a bedroom with my friend cleaning some stuff off of me. That's when I had a panic attack and just realized that I quite possibly have been used. My friend calmed me down and told me that didn't happen. She explained that she couldn't find me anywhere and assumed I went to the bathroom. But after like some minutes, I still didn't show, so she went looking for me, eventually checking the bedrooms and found me laying in bed with the guy sucking something out of my belly button. Apparently he was playing shots with my unconscious body and sucking alcohol out of my belly button, licking salt from my chest, and kissing my lips. She didn't know how long this went on for, but I immediately felt sick and even coughed up from just the thought. Thankfully, my boyfriend got off of work early after my friend told him what happened. He picked me up while my friend asked around about the guy, but of course, no one knew who or recognized him. I was taken to urgent care and looked at. Thankfully, nothing was wrong with me and the drug in my drink didn't cause any further harm than just knocking me out. I wish the story ends here, but I started to receive texts from a random guy. At first, he was just asking me random things and I just didn't reply. But then it showed me a picture of my torso and started saying creepy things to me and even giving me the impression he's stalking me. This is still going on today, just texting me randomly. I've had the idea to try to bait him one of these days to finally have backup to catch him, but I don't know how smart he can be and what he will do to me if things don't go as planned. I have contacted the police and asked what I can do. They took my phone in to copy the texts I received, but I'm sort of doubtful it will go anywhere. I honestly just believe it was a stranger who had bad intentions at the time and acted upon it. I'm not really even upset anymore. I just want to continue with my life and better myself from any other future events. Alright, this happened to me about 3 years ago. It was brought up recently with my friends and they suggested that I post it here. I have gone through therapy for this and trained in firearms because this was the creepiest night of my life. I spent a night in what felt like a horror movie and it's still so vivid. It was a Wednesday night in the summer. I was off work, my husband was out of town, and our son was staying at his grandma's for the night. I was home alone with my dogs, an 80-pound Australian mix and my 80-pound German Shepherd / Pit Bull mix. This particular night I remembered that the trash picked hiccup comes the next day. I decided to turn on Game of Thrones for a bit, then I would take the trash out. All of a sudden, I realize it's 1:30 in the morning and I still haven't taken the trash to the curb. My house has 2 solid iron gates, one in the front and one to the side door / backyard. Lighting on our street isn't that great, but it's a quiet neighborhood with a lot of families and you rarely hear about crime here. I looked out the window by habit before I took the trash out and saw who I thought was my neighbor smoking a cigarette outside of his gate across the street, looking directly at me. For context, this is a normal occurrence. My neighbor across the street hides smoking cigarettes from his wife, so he typically does it late at night in front of his gate. I get off of work late, so I usually see him and we wave, chat a little, then I go inside and he makes the joke he didn't see me smoking if my wife asks. So unbothered by seeing the guy, I go outside, grab my trash cans, open my squeaky iron gate, and take them out to the curb. I did not have my glasses on at the time, so as usual I waved and said hello. However, the guy, who I thought was my neighbor, threw down the cigarette and quickly walked off down the street. It took a minute for me to register that he was not my neighbor. I was a little creeped out because he was clearly staring into my window from the opposite sidewalk, but also maybe it was a guy taking a night walk and just stopped for a cigarette. I thought I probably weirded him out as much as he weirded me out, went back inside and laid on the couch with my dogs to keep watching Game of Thrones. At some point, I fell asleep and I woke up hearing my gate squeak and my German Shepherd mix growling. He's extremely protective of our family at home, but he's also the kind of dog you could take anywhere because he's so friendly in public. My Australian mix is more passive, but his sheer size and scary bark tends to deter people. He's very friendly though. I quickly got up and pulled back my curtain. My gate was still shut and I didn't see anything. My dog, however, continued to growl at my front door. I looked out another window, which had a better view of my front yard and porch. I didn't see anything. Eventually, my dog settled back down with my other dog, but I was still uneasy. I ended up watching television again because I couldn't go back to sleep. About an hour later, I definitely heard my gate squeak. We are the only ones with a heavy cast iron gate and the noise it makes is so distinct. So I look out the curtain while my dogs are continuing to softly growl. My gate is halfway open but I don't see anyone. At this point, I'm panicking. In my panic, I couldn't find my phone. I grabbed my wooden baseball bat out of our room, crouched down, and started going through the couch cushions to get my phone. My dogs are oddly still quietly growling instead of barking, so I assumed no one was there. The minute I find my phone, my front door handle starts shaking. I run to the side door to let my German Shepherd mix out. I know he'll protect me and he can jump the 6-foot back gate. My Australian mix, going crazy, busts out one of our door side lights. I heard the guy say oh crap and immediately I let out my German Shepherd pit bull mix. I jumped up to look out the window, saw my dog latch on the guy's hand. The guy starts screaming and takes off down the street, my dog chasing him. I then become terrified he'll hurt my dog, so I run out with my baseball bat, screaming my dog's name over and over. The next thing I know, my dog is prancing down the street back to me, happy with blood all over his face. I call the police. They took another hour or so to show up and didn't seem to take me too seriously. They said they'd call local hospitals, but I never heard back. I called my husband bawling and he got on the next flight home. I stayed at his mom's for a few days, too terrified to go home. I did buy my dog's giant steaks for being so good and saving me. I don't know what that guy wanted, but since then I've been trained in firearms and self-defense. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.